Hi, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of AIHR Live. My name is Nelly Valinden. I am your host today, and let me start by wishing you all a fantastic 2021, as this is the first episode of the year. As always, do not hesitate to say hi to us in the comments and to let us know where you're watching from, because we really appreciate that, as we have been having viewers from all over the world. I am joined today, as you can see, by Alex Tosovic, Head of Product and Learning and Development Expert at AIHR. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Nelly, and hi, everyone. Happy 2021 on my end as well. I know that it feels like this message is getting already old, but it's never too late, I would say. And happy to be here.
Yes, I'm very happy to have you, Alex, and I'm very much looking forward to our conversation as well. All right, what Alex and I will be doing today, we'll be talking about digital learning and how to make sure that you can implement it in an impactful way. We'll be talking about various ways for organizations to obtain their learning content. We'll also touch on the blending of the content, and in a remote context, we'll talk about how to engage learners and a few more other interesting aspects that are linked to digital learning. Now, as always, if you have any questions or thoughts or feedback during the episode, please share that with us in the comments on LinkedIn, because towards the end of the episode, Alex will be able to answer as many of your questions as possible. Now, Alex, I think I'll go back to you for a second, because perhaps you want to tell us a few words about yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Nelly. Hello, everyone, again. So my name is Alex Tosovic, and I am, as Nelly already said, an expert in L&D, and I'm a head of product here at AIHR. My experience actually comes from in-class training, and I've through different global companies such as Avon and Coca-Cola HBC. I've actually developed a lot of different integrated skills when it comes to L&D, both delivering in-class sessions but also working in an online setting, which was initially a challenge. And I'm very happy to share today with you some of the learnings and bumps on the road that I've managed to overcome on the way. And I'll be happy to answer your questions as well. I'm happy now to be at AIHR because I have the opportunity actually to integrate all the knowledge I had and gathered supporting different organizations when it comes to learning and development. And now I have the opportunity to help others grow and to use that and use all the knowledge I've gathered to build this amazing product that we have, if I do say so myself, right? So yeah. And I'm very much looking forward to answering your questions. So make sure that the chat is on fire today as well. I'm sure you guys are all wondering, how to maximize the learning potential of your organizations, and that's exactly what we are going to be talking about today.
Yes, indeed, Alex. And I mean, I'm super impatient to get started. So I think we're going to attack the first question straight away. Now, Alex, I think it's needless to say that 2020 has been a crazy year for everyone, and that it also has created a new normal, so to speak, in many different ways. If we look at the L&D field, and perhaps more in particular digital learning, how has 2020 changed that?
Well, I think what we all can see is that we all had a lot to learn in 2020. Let's give it that kind of a twist. If we look at some data and research, what we can see is that our stakeholders across L&D across organizations when it comes to L&D have asked our professionals to pivot their strategies. So over 80% of them had to change the way that they intended their learning strategy to look like and how they're going to support the organizations, which means that 90% of the professionals had to change completely how they thought they would be approaching content. What we used e-learning before, mainly depending on, of course, organization to organization, we used e-learning to blend content. We use it as a support to learning. And today we're in a world where e-learning is the only way we can engage with our people and develop organizations. We have very little room left for live sessions, for workshops, simply because our health comes first. And I think I also always like to have this kind of mindset, don't waste a good crisis, as they say,
Yes.
and then creativity likes constraints. So in this kind of setting, also in some of my previous role, I had to pivot the leadership training and fully change it into something else. And I believe that most of the colleagues in L&D had to do the same, actually.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I think that's a good recap. Now, before we'll touch on that again later on specifically this new, more virtual context, of course. But first, I'd like to take a step back and perhaps start with looking at the various ways in which organizations can go about obtaining their learning content. So, what can you tell us about that?
Well, thank you for that question. And it's a question I've been trying to solve for myself for the past 9 years, I think. And I believe a lot of our friends in the chat here. So maybe you can pull up a slide that I've just wanted to maybe illustrate what I'm going to be sharing. So there's 3 ways in which you can go about, providing content to your learners. You can build, buy, or borrow. Some of you might have heard of this phrase. And when we talk about building, this means all the things you can do in-house. So you are going to be using your own in-house experts or subject matter experts to build content. You can buy content, which is typically a one-off transaction. You can buy a leadership training, or you can buy a specialized training for your developers, maybe. And the third thing is borrowing content. We are one of the platforms that you can borrow content, so to say. Borrowing means that you have a license and you basically are using content for some period of time. I am very happy to say that we have a lot of learners that feels that they are with us for so long that as if they own the content. So we have quite a varied audience at AIHR, which I'm very proud of. So how you go about this will depend very much on your learning maturity of your organization. And maybe I can explain that in an example, Neely, if that's okay. So let's imagine that you have an organization, and one of the first things you want to do is build a functional training for your HR population. You also want to make sure you have an onboarding program for your first-time managers. And you also, of course, want to do something with your hypos. And then you will go about building, buying, or borrowing content for these different stages. So, for example, for functional training, for HR, you want to make sure that all of them are covered and that one solution that you didn't build yourself works. For first-time managers, you will want a bit more customization, maybe, and you will work with a consultancy or you will work in-house and maybe build plus buy some of the content. And for your hypos, you might decide to go fully blended and both build, buy, and borrow content. And as I said, which way you go, it will depend on how much actually you're prepared to invest when it comes to internal resources, or how much you're willing to invest your budget. However, I do have to say I went both ways. So I did things both very much hands-on and building everything from scratch to buying all the content. And you can be successful in both cases. And I think we can chat about that as well.
All right. Yes, very interesting, Alex, because one of the things I indeed was wondering about, because we have 3 different ways for organizations to go about obtaining their content. As you just said very clearly, you can either buy it, they can build it, or they can borrow it. And what they will be doing, as you said, will depend on the learning maturity of the organization. But what other factors play a role when organizations decide whichever way they want to go in terms of getting their learning content? Are there some perhaps factors that you see repeatedly that come back all the time?
Yes, and especially when we talk about the way that we approach providing the learning to our learners. How do we make it accessible? So I've talked to many different and in many different platforms, like I'm doing now. And the question that I would get the most would always be, that's great, but what kind of learning management system do we use? How do we make this accessible to the learners? And there's a lot of these different elements and products that you can use on the market. However, I've made a simple split, and I've really thought this through, and you can do this by both doing it yourself and going pro and buying content. And maybe we can also share a little bit on this. I've prepared a distinction for you guys. So if you're a smaller organization and you don't have a huge capacity to, first of all, build everything yourself, but also invest immensely in a budget, you can, in that case, go for these smaller solutions. I'm sure, Neely, you're also familiar with Slack, and I'm sure you've heard, I'm sure that you've heard of also SharePoint, Trello, and Google Classroom. However, these can be the ways where you can first put your content and curate it in a way that it still allows your learners to interact with it. So for example, in Slack, what you can do is create learning channels for different topics and still poll your students, ask them questions, and allow for this social interaction in an environment that's usually used for something else. When it comes to SharePoint, you can simply leave content there for your learners to explore on their own and maybe test them in another environment. When it comes to Trello, we can always replace our flip charts or follow a different learning path where you can build for your learners there and still keep it gamified and keep it fun and social at the same time. And you might also be a big enterprise, and now we're entering a little bit in a more complex area when it comes to selecting what is it that you would want to build, and you want to go pro. Well, you maybe have some other needs. You want to manage all these different learners. You want to understand where they are. You have different geographies, people learning in different languages, and you really need to make sure that you keep good control of it. And this is something that then you would need a more pro solution, which will allow you have a few logos here that I've pulled up of some learning management systems that could help you not only curate the content, but also manage the learners. As I said again, depend where you will go, it will depend on your learning maturity. So how far your organization has already developed when it comes to learning. And if you are not sure where to start, you can start first with DIY. The most important thing is actually that you build the culture of learning. The tool is then a second thing, I would say. So these are a few directions that I see, and that I think really would have helped me some time ago, because I initially went for this GoPro version, and I didn't know fully what to do with it. It was also pricey to build. It needed some more maintenance than I anticipated, but and it didn't initially work because I forgot about the culture element and about how much I need to invest to make sure that people know where they need to learn and how. So that was a very long answer to your question.
It was, but I think it was a useful answer, Alex. Thank you for that. I mean, I made it very clear that there are two main routes that you can go. You can either do it yourself or you can go pro. And perhaps when you're getting started, what is most important is to remember that you need to, of course, also create this culture of learning within your organization. And then perhaps then we can say, like, start small, and perhaps starting small means do it yourself first. Okay, I wanted to touch on something else, Alex, and that is when we look at the actual way in which the learning content is being presented to learners, because I think that within L&D and perhaps also outside of L&D, there seems to be this idea that the way the learning is presented to students needs to be bite-sized, and that it needs to be these micro snippets almost of learning content. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's a great question, and I would also like to use our audience here to just see what they would also comment. So if you guys can write in the comments, how long do you think online learning lessons should last? I'm very curious to see what you would write. In the meantime, I'll give my answer as well. Initially, when I was working in L&D, I thought I need to go, as you said, to bite-sized. It needs to be snappy. It needs to be digestible, and so on. And I also try to build content in that way. But however, what I've learned in AIHR from our learners is they prefer to have 15 to 20 minute lessons. Initially, that struck me. I was like, okay, well, that goes quite contrary to everything I thought and worked for, especially for the online learning environment. And then I thought back to what I was working in, some complaints I've been getting for some other types of learning I implemented. And it was that people felt that they can't go deep enough into the content in these short snippets. So it is fun, it is engaging, but I don't really learn from it. It's the same type of trap that I fell into when I was building this interactive content, self-paced e-learning, where you sort of click through, and then the clicking through becomes the core of your efforts, and you think that just because people click, they will learn at the same time. So we did have a lot of, we can't see forest from the trees elements when it comes to this, but for me, that was a very interesting discovery. And then in the end, people, aside from building engaging content, they really value examples and opportunity to really understand the content in depth, which is still a challenge in an online environment. To make it takes quite some effort to make sure that you build it in that way.
Yes, yes. I do think this is super interesting because, like you, I had the idea for a while that what people wanted was this bite-sized. But when you share the insights that you guys gathered about 15 to 20 minutes being perhaps a more ideal time frame, and also indeed, I think if you wanted to use examples and to integrate them in the learnings as well, you need a little bit more time, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, and also when you're on the other end as an L&D professional, which I think most of the people in our audience would be able to connect, but you do want engagement. So you don't want people to go, you put so much effort into your content, and then you really want people to, go and click, right? However, there are some challenges, as I said, and also some change in mindset that I've had since I've been in this role as well.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, at the same time, that's a good thing, Alex. I mean, let's hope that will continue to be the case, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So something else I'd like to touch on, and you mentioned it very briefly earlier. You mentioned, fun and the social aspect. So I think, of course, the length of the content that you're providing to learners is one element that's important, but another element that's important, even more so, I imagine, when we talk about digital learning, is indeed this socialization element, the fact that people are able to share their experience and maybe ask questions and just interact with other learners. How important do you feel this aspect is? And also, can you perhaps share some best practices about the social element in digital learning?
Yes, absolutely. Well, that's one of my favorite things when it comes to e-learning, and the importance of it, I think, can be explained even now. Like, imagine that you and I are just having a video call and talking about this without an audience that is actually following what we're saying. It would make it a lot less exciting. I don't think that we would have a bad conversation, right?
No.
So in that sense, social aspect to whatever kind of e-learning you're building is very important. It gives learner this opportunity to learn not only in a formal way, which means that they follow the content that you have curated for them, but that they are also able to learn informally from others, for those who are competitive, to compete with different gamifications you can implement in your platform, but also to be able to go a little bit extra out of the content, to play with what you have taught them in different ways. I can show you on the slide a few examples that we have in AIHR in our academy, and these are some of the elements that can be easily integrated in all the solutions that I've shared with you guys before, if you're building them. So learners are able to start their own discussions, open their own topics related to the content. They are able to share opinions, to poll others on different topics that they are curious about, even do their own research. If they are in a company and they are thinking between two different ways to approach their people development or some of the HR processes, they are able to ask questions in the community. Further on, they can also ask questions under the lessons, and they can get in touch with other learners. And so these are just a few examples of social interactions that you can build in. For me, this was hugely important when I did a leadership training and it was fully online, and I had to shift it beginning of last year. And that's where I pose different questions. So, for example, I usually in an online in-class setting, you will ask questions to create rapport. So with leaders, I would say, so how was it for you the first time when you became a leader? So people had the opportunity to still open up and share in an online setting, but still with their colleagues, right? So to me, I think this is one of the key engagement factors. No one wants to be fully alone in this online space, and we can see how much we love it with the number of people in using social media, from Facebook to TikTok today, Snapchat, Instagram, and so on. So we are social beings, and that really does help learning.
Yeah, no, this makes total sense as well. Thanks, Alex, for that. Now, I think we continue a little bit on that because, well, like in-person classroom training practically didn't happen last year, of course, for reasons that we are all very much aware of. But how will this impact the future of blended content?
Well, I would say we have one less ingredient to blend, unfortunately, because before what we were able to do was, build around these in-class sessions, and then everything else that we would blend around would be pre-learning or post-learning. So in that case, we're going to have to plan a little bit differently how we build our content. And I've also pulled a few examples for our viewers here on how that can be done. So what I would suggest, one of the first things that this is an example from a presentation skills training done sometime before. I would always maximize the time that we can have with the learners, which was before they are actually joining the session, where they can share their objectives, where I can share a few assignments, and then after they have completed their journey, they are able to do an assessment or actually discuss the key learnings and so on. And this is not that new. So we did this before. What did change is how we run a live session that used to be live, and how do we maybe engage people for 4 hours in an online session. I can share that for me that worked, and I was absolutely shocked that it worked. I didn't know if that's how that is going to go, and it was an example of a leadership training. And here for me, a tool was very helpful. So here I use Mentimeter, which is an interaction tool for our audience. And because I was initially a trainer, I just thought of the session every time I would have asked a question in a classroom setting. Naturally, people would read the other social cues and would be able to respond to them. However, in an online environment, it's really difficult to understand, who is maybe in doubt, who wants to ask a question. So then I planned for these interactions using a tool. Whenever I wanted to ask a question when I thought I would have wanted to do that in a facilitated live session, I placed an interaction in this online tool. And that resulted in a really, really successful session because it helped me provoke the engagement in these smaller groups, which I would also advise if you are moving to fully online sessions, regardless if you're going to have on-demand learning and blending it with a live session, such as even what we're doing now is an example. What also worked really well, and this was a simple thing to build, but it worked really well even for an online setting, were online role plays where people will split in breakout groups with a facilitator, and they all had a trio role play where they got the script, and they had to actually perform what we discussed in the leadership training in their groups. This worked even better than in a live setting when I ran it, because people would just speak all at the same time. However, in an online setting, I was able to send them to different breakout groups and really, really digest the learning that was intended with the training.
Yeah.
So to be honest, go ahead.
No, I was wondering if it would be correct to say then that to make sure that you create these interactions in a virtual session, that perhaps it needs a little bit more planning, because I imagine when you have an in-person training, you can be a little bit more spontaneous because you have the people in front of you. And as you said, I imagine this is a bit harder when it's a virtual setting, but when you still plan it carefully and prepare it as well, then you can still create some really good interaction. Can I put it like that?
Absolutely, and it's actually it is a bit of a production before it happens. So it would be best if you can have someone who can help you with tech, so to make sure that they are able to produce it for you in that sense, and that you also have facilitators for smaller groups, and smaller groups work much better. Especially in for breakout groups, so that in my mind is really a good way to build these live sessions as well. Again, I will stress that the pre-learning and post-learning are also essential aspects for this, because you do want to use a live session as if you, even that was the same, actually we had the same rule when we were doing in classes before. You want to use the live time for people to interact, to practice the skill, rather than drop new content only and theory, and because that also makes it easier and more fun for you as a presenter. Let's face it, we all want to enjoy what we're doing as well.
Yes.
So a little bit more preparation. When I say a little bit, it is a bit more, but it still pays off big time.
Yeah. Cool. Super interesting. Thanks, Alex. So I'm going to turn to you, and that means those of you who are watching for a second, because I myself have 2 more questions for Alex, and then it's your turn. So I see that there are already some questions coming in, which is fantastic. But again, don't be shy, don't hesitate. Any comments or questions that you may have, drop them in the comments on LinkedIn and we'll get to them in a bit. All right, Alex, I think one of the big challenges of e-learning is how to engage the learners. Now, you touched on this a little bit already in the previous question, but what can you tell us about how companies can best engage learners in e-learning?
Yeah. Well, what I like to call that, and what worked for me, was to use the basis of campaign marketing when it comes to learning. So, and it was also because in the beginning of my career, when I was a trainer, I had to sort of promote what I was doing so that I get the biggest numbers of people to show up for the session. So I really had to advertise whatever content there is, and I think it really pays off to plan for your content and how you produce it, but also to plan how you're going to communicate your learning, how you're going to excite the learners about it. And I know that in the process of building, you focus so much on what you're going to deliver and what the content is going to be. However, getting people engaged, excited, and having strong communication behind your program is really going to help it, and make sure that learners actually do engage in the pre-learning, that it's not an afterthought, and that you do have support for it. And I've shared a few examples even before, and people seem to like them. So I thought, why not now as well? There's a few things that I like to do, and you guys can try it yourself as well. I would have an out of office that's automated, that then links to a course directly in the academy. So basically, it saved me a lot of time, because whoever would email me while I was on holiday would get an automatic email that sends them to the academy, and it's also creative. So that worked well, and you can also make your influence, let me put it that way, your management team to do the same. Another thing that worked really well for engagement was recognition. Some of the platforms you have offered the leaderboards or gamification, and you can already see the top learners over there. What I try to do is to interview them as well, and then send it back to the organization. So here you have an example of someone who, for example, went through people analytics. You have a small interview why they found it useful, and then you actually send it back to the organization, and you also provide recognition for the learners. For me, what also worked really, really well was to engage the subject matter experts in the organization to co-design content. So then you're not the only one, talking and communicating about learning, but you also have, ambassadors throughout the organization that actually can assist you in that, and you're becoming more of a team when it comes to promoting learning.
Yes, and I think, Alex, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. I think that comes back. I think that comes back once again as well to building this learning culture within the entire organization. Correct? It's basically about involving as many people as possible. But that's on a side note.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely, that really helps it. Thank you for the comment, because that's exactly what it is about. And you don't make this L&D where you are this loner promoting learning, but you really have support from other people in the organization, and you see it as a common effort, because it does make the organization go forward and become better. And that goes with it. And the last thing is actually to think of your branding as well. To what is your learning organization? What is your what do you stand for? What is your vision? How do you communicate your content? What kind of visuals do you use? Are you recognizable? And these are some of the things that you can think through, and it can be actually a creative process. And then it becomes much easier to sort of build communication once you have these fundamentals in place.
Yes, and then by extension, that helps in engaging the learners.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it makes your life better. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so then I think now, Alex, this is where we actually go to an even more exciting part of this episode, and that is we go to the questions from the audience. So, I mean, don't hesitate again. If you have questions, you can still ask them in the comments, but we'll get started with the first ones. So I have here a question that is coming from, and really excuse me if I don't pronounce your name correctly, from Eche Kilinch. I hope I say that right. And the question is, how can we increase employee attendance to digital learning platforms?
So I think I now talked about partially about that as well. One thing that comes before engagement is making sure that whatever kind of content you're pushing, that it is connected to the business. The biggest challenge is that the L&D is talking about one topic and the business is in a completely different environment. So what I tried to sync was actually, if the business is doing strategy planning, that then in L&D communication, I push for how do you do goal setting, how do you do performance review, how do you evaluate or set goals or OKRs and so on. So this connection with the business will create this urgency for people to be intrinsically engaged. If you want to have more of a type of push engagement, you can go with these engagement ideas that I've shared with you before. Another option is to use ambassadors for different topics that will be able to do that. And one more idea is that so aside from following the business, you can also integrate learning with other processes in HR. So this means if you have personal development processes or conversations in your organization, your managers can have a library of courses that are available and recommend as a part of their learning path to their teammates some of the courses that you have built or that you are promoting. If you are interested to hear more about, I'm not sure who exactly asked the question, I didn't pick up the name right, shoot me a message on LinkedIn, and we'll brainstorm a little bit together.
Yeah, fantastic. I think as well, Alex, what I'd like to add about this link between, making sure that there's a link between the learning and development and, of course, the business of the company. I think what is another advantage of that is that it also makes it way easier to turn whatever you've been learning into practice. And I think that's an important element, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So we have another question, and the question is coming from Cleda Muslia, and that is, what would you suggest are the best metrics or practices to measure learner engagement in digital learning platforms? So we're looking at the metrics right now.
Yes, so this is, I think, favorite. I always get a metrics question when it comes to learning. I do think that digital learning is a bit easier to track than the in-class sessions. So I'm not sure if someone is going to have a question as well for that. Which this is this constant problem that in L&D you have is like how much impact are you really making with what you're doing. When it comes to the digital tools, you can always track how much your learners have, how far are they in the course, how long they have stayed with the course. When it comes to videos, you can track what is your drop-off rate. So that means if you have video learning, you want to see if learners actually progress through the learning or they actually just stop. One easy way, so a lot of these GoPro platforms will offer this kind of analytics in the background, so which you can track. I always, if you have that kind of solution, you can also go to see what are the most popular courses and really to understand why and where learners are within those within those courses, and you will understand what kind of what pieces of your library are impactful. Some of the other factors that can help you understand is how much learners actually engage with the interactions that you have posted within the within your learning, which means polls, interactions, and so on. And one of the easy ways to track that is to understand how much actually people progress through your course, and what is their score in the end if you are having an assessment or a quiz. If you're using a solution that's more your own, if you went for DIY, you would have to sort of collect feedback and data yourself. Because if you're using Trello, if you're using SharePoint, you would then have to make these few points maybe before and after to understand what the knowledge level is, and also to ask maybe some qualitative questions about how engaging the content was.
Yes, I was going to say perhaps then a survey might be an idea, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks, Alex. All right, I've got another one coming here for you, and the question is coming from Neil, and it's saying, when considering the build, buy, borrow, what would you say is generally the breaking point of when you should consider shifting your strategy?
I'm curious to shifting your strategy to what? This is one thing, so I can maybe share both perspectives. So initially, when I was working on when I started with e-learning, which was 6 years ago, when it was one of the first platforms, we went to build everything ourselves because it was difficult to find a vendor that would build at the time, and that actually broke our budget, and it was very, very difficult. So now, in retrospect, I think that you need to prioritize where you want to use your internal headcount and resources that you have. So my proposal would be that for things that need some customization, for example, that can be if you're talking about building an onboarding journey for people in your organization, you're going to do much better job than an agency when it comes to building the journey and maybe adding some elements. When it comes to training for your top leaders, you do want to have external experts that are going to guide them for important topics, but you still want to understand who from your organization is going to do strategic pieces and where you want to have really in-house imprint. So balancing this is where your internal resources will be of maximum value versus where it's maybe not necessary for you guys to be engaged, where you can simply have the borrowed content. I gave you an example in the beginning, which would be maybe a platform where people can pull content, like such as we are, and there's Udemy or edX and some other platform where you can simply provide access to your learners and they can pull content on their own where you don't have to engage. So really being smart about where you use your own resources from in-house is one of the key things, and that's where you will, I think, have the biggest challenge.
Right, thank you. I've got one more, a few more, but here's the next one because I need to look at the time as well, Alex.
I completely forgot about the time. I'm having so much fun.
Me too. I completely forgot about it. And I'm really happy with all these questions because I think they're super good questions. So here's one coming from Fatima Aziz. And so the question is, if we are developing our HR department from scratch, how can we make sure that e-learning becomes fundamental to the department? Is there perhaps a fixed policy? Is that a solution?
So thank you for the question, Fatima. I think it starts with how you want to build your learning culture, and the best way to do this actually is to start before the employees have joined. So if we're talking about HR specifically, that means when someone starts, you want to build a pre-boarding for them, because same as in relationships, it's also when people are joining a company, it's very important that you set the rules and the values from the get-go. Later on, it's very difficult to change. So if you set the learning as a priority from the very beginning, once you sign your contract, this is where your pre-boarding goes, and there's already engagement that they can make with company, and they understand where they go to learn. that's the best way to sort of initiate this, and then later on you can maintain it with a policy. However, maybe you should think also of ways that you will intrinsically motivate people to go and learn. If they find the content valuable, they will go themselves as well, but still make it a habit from the very beginning. That would be instrumental in making sure that people are engaged with content. And one more aspect when it comes to why it's important in the beginning is when you're changing jobs or when you're joining an organization or a new role, your motivation is at its peak. You want to perform, you want to do your best. So use that momentum to teach people that learning is an integral part for success in your organization.
Yeah, thank you. I think, Alex, I have one last question for you then, and that is actually, I imagine there's quite a few L&D professionals watching as well. So now let's say if L&D professionals themselves want to stay up to date with what's happening, what would you recommend them to do?
Well, you always you have to take care of the goose, as you say. So one of the platforms you can of course develop yourself is with us as well. We do have a L&D certificate program, and we will be ramping it up in the future as well. However, staying part of the community, such as the e-learning heroes or e-learning industry, these are some also interesting platforms where you can pick up on the more technical aspects of learning. To me, what always added the most value were actually some of the webinars and hands-on experience from people who have already tried to implement digital learning and e-learning in practice. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Alex, I mean, I'm sorry to say, but our time is up for today. We need to really wrap up this episode. But I want to thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your insights and your experience with us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed it, and I hope that our audience got a few tricks up their sleeve throughout this time.
Now, one last thing, because perhaps if anyone wants to indeed ask you a question, Alex, or get in touch, what would be the best way for them to reach you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. So I think that would be the easiest address. It's my name and surname, so Alex Tosovic, and you can, if you're curious about some of the things we discussed, let's continue our conversation in a chat room then.
Yes, thank you very much, Alex, and goodbye.
Thank you, and goodbye, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.
Bye. Now, if you are interested in any of the topics that Alex and I talked about today, you may want to check out our Learning and Development Certificate program. This is a really good example of digital learning. It is fully online and self-paced, and some of the topics covered in the L&D certificate program are creating a future-looking skills gap analysis, building an L&D strategy, and putting that L&D strategy into practice in creating a culture of learning and coaching within your organization, and of course also metrics to measure the ROI of your learning interventions. So if that's something you're interested in, don't hesitate to hop over to AIHR.com and check it out. From me to you as well, thank you so much for joining us for the first episode of AIHR Live of 2021. Stay safe and take care until hopefully the next time. Goodbye.